Hello, my name is Angela Smith. I'm the CEO of Workequal. Now you know the organisation very well and know us very well. You would have known us as Dress for Success Dublin. But since last October, we took the decision to rebrand. So first of all, I want to say an amazing thank you to One for All, Business and Finance for supporting us again this year. And I also want to thank our sponsors and supporters and participants in today's event. At Workequal, we are at the forefront of helping women back into the workplace and helping them progress by removing or reducing barriers. So we provide a number of services, such as mentoring, coaching, one-to-one conversations with career experts, financial education programs, employer workshops. So take the example of one of our clients, Brenda. She was 19 years at home, so she participated in our mentoring program, which is you meet a mentor once a month for 6 months. And at the end of it, she actually felt energised, had the confidence to go look for that job or further training, but she also said her 19 years at home was actually of value. We have supported over 4,000 women in 10 years, and 5 out of every 10 have actually got work. So I'm looking forward to today's conversations and hearing the various perspectives on how the participants dealt with bias and how they actually progressed. So enjoy the day, and I'm now going to hand you over to Sonia.
Thank you, Angela. I am indeed Sonia Lennon, the founder of Workequal, and I'm delighted to say I'm your host and MC for today's event. International Women's Day 2022 is running under the theme of breaking the bias, and it's a really interesting lens to look at the issues that women face. Angela spoke about the work that Workequal does in terms of supporting women to thrive as individuals, but really importantly, at Workequal we also look at the systemic structure of the workplace for women. And today we're going to be diving a little bit deeper with 2 incredible panels with multiple perspectives on the issue of bias. And now it's time for our first panel. You are so welcome. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by you all today. Louise Macaulay-Crothers from Exit Entry, Maura Aston from Canoeing Ireland, and Catherine Guy from Nifty Business. And CEOs all, may I add. And when I look at the sectors and the areas that you find yourselves in, one could say that they are generally considered to be male areas. So, cars, canoeing sport, FAI, technology. These are the very sectors that we're trying so hard to normalise women, and you are in positions of leadership. But today's panel is really about a little bit of a deep dive into bias. And it's really interesting, I think, that you are all women who have reached the top of your respective sectors in your roles. So it'd be easy to think that perhaps you haven't experienced bias. But Louise, is that your case?
Oh, I wish it was, but it isn't, Sonia. Realistically, my whole life, I've experienced bias, whether that was in school, working for other people, and, working within my own company. Certainly not within my own team, I haven't experienced it, but certainly within the startup sector, I have. So it's followed me from the ages of 5 when I wanted to play football and I couldn't, right through to when I've had comments about my investment opportunities because of the tattoos that I have. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I think we need to look upstream in terms of a solution and start educating our youth around how they can achieve anything that they want to at a very early age.
And it's interesting, I think, because you spoke about bias being very obvious to you from early education. And this, I think, comes down to perceptions of difference, perhaps, not fitting in to the way things are done around here. And bias falls into 2 buckets for me. It's sort of the personal biases that are enacted against us, and then the sort of deeper systemic biases that a lot of women don't experience until maybe that they're at a certain level. Maura, is that something that you've come across, that it's sort of an insidious, invisible bias that lives in the background?
Absolutely, Sonia. And like I would have come through a system of, because I'm of a different generation to people who are starting out now. I came through at a time when there was no acknowledgement that there was any bias there. You felt it internally, but nobody was speaking about it. And so you would kind of be the other if you thought I deserve more, I should have more, I should. But certainly, when I started out working on a full-time basis, it was accepted that women would stay at home and look after the children. It wasn't questioned. And I think that this new world of questioning the reasons why we do certain things is so important. And it's opened up that whole conversation of why, and if we keep, my belief is if we keep questioning as we are and challenging, well, then things will continue to improve as they go along. But certainly, I think that step from employee to leader or into a CEO role certainly got me to the point where I was viewed differently by people. And so I could very clearly see where the biases were across a whole landscape of, things that are happening around me in terms of business. So it was a really interesting journey, but I do believe the landscape has changed entirely from the time that I started working to now. It's a much better place now, I think.
And when we were talking in advance of this call, this term of auto-validation came up, that with positional leadership, there's an acceptance that you're good enough once you reach the top, but the struggle is on the way, right? And Catherine, I know, yeah. I know, Catherine, that you very much changed sectors from the legal profession into your new role, and I think the legal profession is it's pretty famous for the impediments through long hours culture, through this sort of systemic issues for women. Was that your experience?
Yeah, but I, like Moira, I have many decades under my belt at this stage. And I think, you're right, that industry and sector was famed for all of those good things that you spoke about. But I do think there has been change over the last few decades. There has been a lot more women coming into the profession, which can only be a good thing. I think there's still more to be done, though. As Moira has said, I think there is still a lack of senior female leadership across not just the legal sector, professional services, the banking sector. So really need to see that visibility coming through. And what I really think is such an important point that Maura made there is, and that auto-validation, that's a new one on me. I learn new phrases every day. But the fact that when you do get to a position of leadership, you can see the landscape a lot more clearly. And that's exactly the power that's required to enable that change to happen. Because when you're there, you can see it, you understand it because you've lived it and you can do something about it.
Louise, you made a very interesting point when we were talking about a trans friend of yours, and it's been ringing in my ears since you said it. You might just share what that conversation was.
Yeah, sure. So I went to an all-girls school, and one of my very good friends at the time, who has now transitioned from female to male, made a point to me quite recently. Well, actually, it's probably about 2 years ago, but I always remember it because he was talking to me about, women in STEM and how difficult it is to get to a leadership role and the obstacles that we have to cross. And he said to me, Louise, no matter how bad you thought there was in terms of bias towards women, it's 10 times worse. And his point was that because he has had an opportunity to live as a female and as a male, and within the male sector and within the workplace, he has seen things that he would never have seen living through that view as a woman. And it just really struck me and actually really upset me because I was hoping that things had changed. Now, in saying that, through his transition, he got incredible support through work. So there definitely was that support system there. But for somebody, it was a real eye-opener for me, and a real value piece to see it from the other side.
And I was saying that the academic Caroline Criado Perez tells a story about a male mathematician who transitioned to female, and giving an academic paper at a conference, he overheard two of the attendees saying, she's not a patch on her brother. So, there was assumptions made about ability based on gender, even though it was the same individual with the same talent. But I think, Catherine, what's interesting about this is that the conversation is changing. So we've, I suppose, necessarily laid out a landscape of what bias looks like to all of us. And in fact, even with Workequal, when it began its life as Dress for Success, and I sat in front of an interview panel looking for grant funding, and one of the members of the panel, who happened to be male, said to me, you don't look like a social entrepreneur. And it's like that kind of, I'm not sure you'd get away with that now, but I think what's interesting about this is that we all carry bias, and this is not about a sort of a condemnation. One of the most interesting things you can do is go on to the Harvard Implicit Bias Test, which is open source. You can take any test you want to test your own internal biases as part of a longitudinal study. I highly recommend anybody jump on and take the test. But Catherine, in your own biases, are you aware of biases that you carry?
Yes, I am. So first, let me say, after we spoke last night, I did that longitudinal test and I didn't like the results, to be honest. I was surprised by the results. So yeah, and I think that one of the biases that I think I have lurking around in the back of my brain is this assumption about what women are good at versus what men are good at. And actually, I think that works in two ways. I think in the back of my head, it worked against me when I was coming through, because, and to Maura's point earlier, it just kind of accepted that, you weren't good at negotiation, or you were good at management, but you weren't good at leadership, those type of kind of mantras in your head. And now I think I have to check myself to make sure that I'm not perpetuating kind of those same assumptions, and that's been something I've been aware of for quite a while. So yeah, just not making assumptions about what stereotypically women are good at, and actually checking myself to make sure when I look at the landscape, when I look at who I'm recruiting, when I look at who I'm talking to, that I'm being fair, reasonable, and completely holistic about it.
I'm a great fan of a decision-making matrix. What are the 3 questions to ask yourself before you make a key decision, to allow yourself to check yourself and say, well, because we all do it, and Maura, what about you? Have you become aware? And it is a little bit of a sort of a rite of passage to allow yourself to understand your own shortcomings in this area. And the reason I'm asking this question is because for our audience, male and female, it's to normalize this acceptance. Not that you are kind of saying it's okay, but it's the beginning. That awareness is the beginning of positive change, I think. So what has been your I suppose learnings about yourself?
Yeah, and actually fully agree with Catherine there. It's all about checking yourself, checking in with yourself, reflecting on things that you say and do. And what I find really useful, I live in a male household, 2 male sons and a husband, and I check in with them all the time, because I think if you can start it at a local level, so the conversations around somebody said something to me and this is how what I think they meant. And from a male perspective, they come back and they're like, no, you're way off. That's not what they mean at all, and it's like, a small thing I think of sometimes is if there's a big box to be moved, a man will say, here, I'll do that for you. A woman will say, can I help you with that? And you can read that in 2 entirely different ways, men opening doors or whatever. I don't tend to get exercised about those things at all. I think that they're trying to be helpful and polite. On the other hand, I could take it if I'm feeling biased about things that they are trying to control, or they're trying to, exert their I'm stronger than you on you. And so I think that reflective piece is one of the most important things. And I think everyone should have people around them, or they should find people around them who they can check in with, who they trust, who they'll say, am I reading this right? From their perspective, what would you think? So I think that's a really useful thing to do.
I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said. And it's also, it begins to allow us to create a language in our organizations around how we parse experience and what narratives are coming to the table, but also having the courage is maybe not the right word, because I don't think it should take courage. I think it should take normalization to say to somebody else, well, can I ask you, what's behind that decision? And have you looked at it from this perspective? And in a way, the term call-out culture is detrimental to a world in which we should be able to have open and honest conversations to improve our lot. Louise, I know that you have a very particular lens on the biases that you hold. I'd love you to share them.
Yes. So, obviously within our company, Exit Entry, we represent the youth's voices. And the more I work with that generation, every day is a learning, and they blow my mind in terms of their insights. When I compare myself to what I was at 14, and I look at the 14 years of today and how socially educated they are and articulate they are, there's just no comparison. So I think internally what I've really looked at is that age and experience does not necessarily mean that I have more knowledge than somebody who is of perhaps 2 decades younger than me. And I'm very, very passionate about that because I believe that there's bias in ageism. I believe that we need to be very careful in terms of our recruitment processes around, affirmation in terms of hiring people that are similar to ourselves. I believe that we need to operate certainly within a workplace which is diverse. By diverse, I mean that's everything from age to skin color to gender. And I believe there's a lot of work to do around the language that we use and the hiring processes that we have that should be really driven by data-driven decisions. We should not need to know what that person's name is. We should not need to know what age that person is. It's whether that the skills they have are right for the job that they need to do. And I guess, I take Maura's point as well. I'm from a very heavily dominated male household. I was brought up, my poor father had 5 women living in the house, and now I'm living with 4 men, which is fantastic, but I'm very grounded by my perspectives because I'm called out on them every day in the house. But it is that self-reflection piece, but I do feel that there is a huge amount of work to do in terms of the processes that we use in terms of hiring in the workplace.
Amazing. And I think the winners of this game are going to be those with a growth mindset who aren't in a fixed state. And it's really about having a culture that allows us to tackle the fear and ignorance around these areas. I'm going to do a quick fire round now just to ask you to collate the wisdoms and the learnings yourselves. And Catherine, I might start with you.
So I think if you're in a business or an organization and you look at it and you don't have a diverse community, you don't have a diverse workspace, and gender is part of that, you've got a problem and you need to address it immediately. Amazing. Maura?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's all around balance. And if you don't have balance, you're missing a huge, potential growth area. So it's about, and this is kind of tagging on to what Catherine said, it's about looking around and see who's missing, because you sometimes don't notice who's not there until you actually really question yourself, who else should be here. So I think that you need to do that a lot of the time, just,
I stood up once at a talk to a financial institution, and predominantly male, and I said to them, if you are at a decision-making table and there are only men around it, you need to decide which one of you is going to be the woman. Which elicited a kind of uproarious response. But the point is this: if there isn't a woman at the table, it's not a representative decision-making process. So that is absolutely the point. Louise, how about you?
Well, I agree with Catherine and Maura. I guess in terms of workplace, there has to be diversity, but I think that industry and companies have a massive responsibility about bringing that message upstream and into schools and to students around what a workplace should look like, and actually how you can aspire to be in those roles as a female leader or any gender in terms of what that might look like in the workplace.
Amazing. And I think you're all so on it in terms of, words matter, behaviors matter. Each culture is made up of individual behaviors that become normalized. So each micro decision and behavior matters in terms of developing a culture that is ultimately respectful of everybody, regardless of their classification or their identification. And my hobby horse is that I think we have fallen into the trap of over-classification of our society. We need to step back from that and see people for the human in front of us. Ladies, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well,
Hi, I'm Jock Jordan and I'm the Regional Vice President for Ireland for Blackhawk Network One for All. One for All Rewards is proud to once again sponsor Workequal on its International Women's Day event. This is a cause that is very close to our heart as a business. Our core focus is employee recognition and well-being, and equality in the workplace is a huge part of that. We are a business that looks after our people. Diversity and inclusion is not only an important part of our business, but it's an essential element of our business success. 59% of our employees are female, and women make up 55% of our management team at One for All. More recently, we were proud to announce Emer Redmond, who's manager of our field sales, and Rachel Fistel, who's manager of our inside sales, after showing incredible growth and initiative on our corporate sales team since joining the One for All team 5 years prior. Blackhawk Network, who acquired One for All in 2019, is led globally by Talbot Roach. It's under her leadership that we continue to ensure allyship, engagement and progress across our organisation. At One for All, we've implemented many initiatives to help our employees grow and develop through nurturing their capabilities, both professionally and personally. This includes providing access to key resources such as LinkedIn Learning, points-based recognition programs, virtual employee reward ceremonies, digital gym classes, guided meditation videos, and nutritional webinars. We also emphasise the importance of a work-life balance through quarterly wellness days and adopting a hybrid working model. In addition, we have an online hub for idea sharing so our team can submit ideas that positively impact the wider business. These small but significant initiatives have helped boost morale and contribute to an empowered workforce with equality and diversity at the core. I would encourage any business to evaluate their approach, to identify what they're doing well, but also areas that they can improve on employee empowerment, greater diversity, and promoting a work-life balance. Once again, we would like to thank Workequal for the opportunity to partner with them on this event. We're very proud to be part of these vital conversations on breaking the bias in Irish business today. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to welcome our next panel, another panel with multiple perspectives and a focus on the next generation. So, where do I begin with the wonderful panel that I have now looking at perspectives of the next generation? And I feel honoured to be in the presence of our panellists today. We have Emer Neville, who is the president of the ISSU, the Irish Secondary Students Association. You're very welcome. Union, excuse me, as opposed to association. David Monaghan, deputy editor of Business and Finance, journalist and LGBT activist as well. Ola Majikotumi, who is journalist, broadcaster, writer, and we have Senator Eileen Flynn, who is, I believe, Senator, the first member of the travelling community to be elected to the Seanad. Am I right?
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So we're looking at bias today as the theme of International Women's Day, and I've spoken to all of you about this, and it's a pretty thorny issue. It's not a pleasant area to unpick, but I think what we have the opportunity to do today is to really look at how we can forge a way forward, how we can mould behaviours to be more open to everybody, regardless of their identification. And Emer, I'm going to start with you, because I was very taken when we spoke in our pre-call about your wisdom and experience as a woman, a young woman in leadership, because it takes a lot of women a lot of decades to come to the conclusions that you've already drawn. So you might talk to me about some of the experiences that you've had in your role.
Yeah, so I suppose being a woman in leadership, I've learned a lot from it over the last year, particularly the fact that there is a lot of bias when working with men in different organizations. So, for example, my predecessor is a man, and he would have had amazing relationships with loads of different stakeholders. You know, they'd ring each other up for advice. You know, they were very friendly with each other, and I just don't have those relationships. And talking to a few of the staff members in my organization, you know, I was trying to figure out why this was, and ultimately I came to the conclusion that it's because I'm an 18-year-old girl, and those people don't want to be ringing me up, and I suppose having that same relationship that my predecessor would have had, which is very disappointing, because it was very valuable information to him, and they were great connections, and I haven't been afforded that opportunity because of my age or because of my gender. And I suppose it's something that I've only realised over the last few weeks, you know, from hearing stories from him, and even from my own deputy president, who's also a man and would have, I think, a different relationship with stakeholders than I would. Certain stakeholders will ring him, but they won't ring me, and things like that. And while they mightn't seem like a big deal, you know, when you're working in this area, having those connections is really important, and having those relationships. So it does make your job a lot harder to do, and you often find yourself kind of, I suppose, looking to make connections in other areas. I would, again, and this is a bias I've acknowledged myself, that I would find myself, I suppose, drifting towards working with more women, because, you know, it's easier for me to make connections with them. And because we have, I suppose, that bond already about the fact that we are women in leadership positions, and we can really, I guess, relate to that. But it's like I said, it's something I've kind of realised over the last few weeks, and I'm just still kind of trying to wrap my head around it.
It's really interesting though, isn't it? And I wonder, is there a little bit of, and this is going to be controversial even saying it, but is there a different kind of fear with a generation perhaps of older men in engaging with a young woman? Is there sort of a norm around potentially perceived predatory behavior or something like that? I just wonder, is that part of the fear? Because we've already stated that, you know, bias is grounded in fear and ignorance. It's not knowing how to behave, or something that's not normalized in our world view. And I just wonder, and obviously this is fresh off the press, Emer, so you're still trying to understand it. But a little piece of me wonders whether there is something in addressing the elephant in the room and saying, you know, can we talk about how we can have perhaps a closer relationship to deliver our respective and collective missions together, and what can we do to make that more comfortable for everybody? I think that would take a lot of courage from your position, but I think it's all, and you know, this is the other thing about bias, and David, we talked about this. I might come to you about the onus of responsibility on the underrepresented or the minority to be the educator in this role, and this is something that really resonated with me. So I'll come back to you, Emer, but you might talk to me, David, about your experience of being in receipt of biases.
Yeah, I suppose spinning off what you were talking about, people can kind of come to view you as a spokesperson for an entire group, or as some kind of, I suppose, sort of viewing you in the abstract. Like I remember, I recall around the time of the marriage equality referendum, people coming up and, you know, trying to spark a debate with me, even though like even though like it very much involved, you know, me, it involved my friends, it involved, like, I guess what I'm trying to hint at is that like they didn't view it as something that affected real people. Like it was, you know, seen as a very much a discussion point or a debating point. Yeah, like, and I think, you know, I think you can always kind of tell if people are coming to you in good faith, or if with questions, or if it's kind of to satisfy, I guess, sort of a sensationalist urge or something. I mean, and you know, personally, I know it's a very personal thing. I don't mind answering questions in good faith, but at the same time, you can't expect every single person from an underrepresented group to shoulder the burden of having the answers. So I think there is a responsibility on the individual to maybe do their own research, maybe go online, maybe look up some of these conversations, because it's all out there, you know. I think we're living in a very exciting time with social media and with the internet, where we can see a wide range of experiences from many different people from many different backgrounds. You know, that's just at our fingertips, you know, with a click of a button. So I think I think maybe if you do have questions, you know.
Yeah, and I know that this is something that has been discussed at length in terms of educating ourselves to be more inclusive, and I think we have to kind of recognize that it's a meeting of minds. So if two different perspectives are coming together, that there's a responsibility on both parties. And I think it's okay to ask somebody about their own personal, well, it's not always okay, it depends on how it's done, but the concept of asking somebody about their personal perspective is different to asking them to represent, as you said, a whole body or a classification of people. And I think we have to be very mindful of that. There's a guy called David Smith in the US who is, he's written a couple of books on allyship. And I think he has some interesting points about how to approach, because I think sometimes we don't even know how to ask the questions, you know. It's the fear has got the better of us, and maybe we want to be better people, maybe we want to be more inclusive, but how do you even begin that question? And he has a sort of a tip which I think can be very useful around asking to ask. So instead of asking the question, you're asking, is it appropriate or okay for me to ask you this question? So you're kind of couching it in a way that says, well, that doesn't sound right to me, or I'm not willing to represent that opinion. Eileen, is that something that resonates with you around your own experience?
Could I just start off by saying, Sonia, you know, we talk about like us being the problem of not being or trying to include ourselves in society. Just to name it here today, that we are not the problem. You know, travelers are not the problem. LGBTQI plus people, gay people, young people, Black people, we're not the problem. And we're not the ones with the issue. The ones with the issues is society in general. We can call it bias. Some people like to not take responsibility for their bias, for their prejudice, and they like to say that it's ignorance, not knowing or not understanding. I think it's important that we ask the question. I think it's important to have conversations, but also remember that we're not the problem. You know, that it's the workplace is the problem. And it's not about blaming society as a whole. That's not my point at all. But a lot of the time we look at, say, for an example, trans issues, travelers issues. So we're putting things back to the most vulnerable people in our society, instead of saying, actually, what's our issue as a society? And that's not being inclusive. It's not. Like, my motto in everything I do is looking around the room and saying, actually, who's not here? You know, and if I don't see Black people there, I'll name it. If I I know that there's no Muslim people in the room, I will name it. And again, I just think it's really important, people with disabilities, that we name the people who are not there, you know. Yeah. And we have to be very mindful that every single one of us are prejudiced, you know, and we all judge. When we hurt a person because we're prejudiced, or act out in prejudice, which becomes racism, which becomes hurting a person or harming a person, that's inappropriate, you know. And I think we have to understand that, like, you know, we judge people every day. We judge people by how they dress or their style, etc. But what we shouldn't be doing is acting out in those prejudices, and not judging books by its cover as well. And again, in employment, you know, down to your address, down to your sexuality, down to your background, the colour of your skin, your ability, your disability, you're judged on every single level, which should not be the case. And whatever about being judged on your ability to complete a job and to do a job and carry out a job well, you should not be judged on the basis of who you are as an individual.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I'm struck by the fact that these dreaded classifications that we've placed on people are so arbitrary. Like they're only, you know, labels that somebody has decided exist. They have no basis in an intellectual discussion around this. And, you know, Ola, talking to you and I was really struck that the first bias that you talked about having experienced was around you being an Irish language speaker, and that the worst effect of that was that, you know, people couldn't handle their own inadequacies in speaking Irish while you were able to converse fluently. I mean, that says it all for me.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it seem like that's, like, you know, the biggest discrimination.
Yeah.
And again, you know, a lot of people here in this country don't speak Irish, so, you know, it's not that surprising that people would be surprised that I speak it, so I get that. But yeah, obviously, you know, that comes with a lot of its own bias in its own territory. But for me, really, the main thing would be, you know, people just stereotyping me as a Black person, you know, people assuming I'm not from here and I didn't grow up here, you know, people just assuming you'll have a certain accent, people just assuming all kinds of things about you. And it does make you feel small. And it does make you feel like, gosh, am I even a person? Do I even belong in this society, kind of? And it does get to you sometimes. It does affect your mental health, and it's hard, especially when I was younger, you know, growing up. And, you know, we are living in a white society, no doubt about that. Ireland is a white country. And, you know, it's like just trying to find yourself in things. And, you know, for a long time, maybe I would have been very self-conscious about being the only Black person in the room. You know, I went to schools that were mostly, you know, very white. And yeah, I suppose it's just like sometimes you kind of feel like, oh, am I being seen too much? And that's something I really struggled with when I was growing up, you know, being seen, because I was already tall. I was like one of the very few Black people. So I felt very seen, and that was very uncomfortable then. But I suppose it's like turning it into your own thing, like feeling your uniqueness and loving that. So I found a way to love that. And it comes in little things, you know. Even the other day, I was kind of scared about going to a yoga class because I was thinking, gosh, would I be the only like Black person there and things? Will people like think I'm too different? So it comes up in your mind in all sorts of ways. And yeah, definitely it's difficult sometimes, but I try to own it these days and try to own that uniqueness to help me keep going and to make me feel good.
I mean, it really is fascinating and inspiring to listen to you, and I can't believe we're nearly out of time with this panel. I'd love to do a run around each of you and just ask you about, you know, if you could change one thing, because a lot of this is systemic as well as individual interactions. It's actually baked into how we do things. Eileen, if you could change one thing to make Ireland a more inclusive place to be, what would it be?
If we could change one thing, is to make Ireland realise that we are all different, but should be treated with equal value and equal respect, and obviously to celebrate each other's differences. We're not meant to be the same, you know, so we're meant to, and I think it's really important that we recognise difference, but we celebrate it and we value people no matter their difference, with that equality of opportunities.
And we're missing a trick if we're not celebrating that richness, I suppose. David, how about you?
Gosh, if I could change.
You have the magic wand right now. It's all yours.
I suppose, empathy is, it's a big driving force, but in my life. So I suppose, empathy and understanding would be something I would, if I could wave a magic wand, I would cast it all over the land. But I mean, from a queer's perspective, I know that I think, we've made massive leaps forward with regard to certain members of the LGBT community in the workplace and elsewhere. But I think I would like employers to be more conscious of trans people and maybe people who are transitioning at work and what that would entail, and how it, like, if you're enforcing a rigid dress code, like consider how that might affect someone who is non-binary, and maybe have a conversation with them and see how you can work around it. Like maybe maintain something formal, but like maybe they might want to wear, I don't know, a blouse or something. Or like maybe how does your healthcare policy incorporate people who are medically transitioning? Like, would you give them adequate time to recover and heal? And I suppose that's where I would be coming from.
So broadening the awareness, I think, is at the centre of that, and empathy absolutely is required, and respect as part of that. Emer, how about you? What's your one great moment? Although I'm sure you've got plenty of great moments ahead of you. That is not to say that isn't the case.
Well, I definitely have to agree with David and Eileen. But I think, kind of like, well, what Eileen said, I mean, I think breaking barriers really comes down to respect and just respecting one another. I think, it really all does come down to respecting each other in what is like an already complex world. So I think just ensuring that, we are kind and we're empathetic and we're respectful of one another and our diverse backgrounds and our history and our story as well.
Lovely. Ola, what about you?
For me, I think I told you this on the phone, but I would say integration. So I think Ireland going into that way would be much more beneficial for the country and society, just so that we're together, but we're actually learning together as well. And it's not about assimilation as well. It's about coming together and sharing one another's culture and just learning from that, because it's all about education at the end of the day. As I've always thought, no one came out of the womb woke. We learn these things, and it's about unlearning things as well. So it's all about education as well. Yeah.
Growth state. That's what it is. It's about growth mindset, opening up, empathy, respect and kindness. I don't think we can say fairer than that. To all of you, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us for International Women's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to everybody who has made this happen and everybody who took part. But this is not just about International Women's Day. This is about progressing the conversation for equity for everybody in the workplaces of Ireland. So if you are passionate about inclusive workplaces, about really challenging those barriers, jump onto workequal.ie and get involved, not just today, but in the future success of our organisation, our clients, and our advocacy to make Ireland a better place for everybody.